Hi everyone, welcome to the visual guide for Thok as Thok Extreme. My name is Miztech and I'll be your primal guide. The beauty of Ravana X is that most of the fight is a set pattern of mechanics that are easily countered. However, a single slip up to any mechanic will cause you to be debuffed with a 3-minute vulnerability, which is a huge chunk of the fight and will probably snowball into something worse. All players need to know how to move appropriately at all times and ideally never get hit with anything throughout the entire encounter. An important aspect of the fight lies in Ravana's Bloodlust bar. Each time Ravana reaches 100 Bloodlust, he will gain a stacking damage buff and transition into a new stance: Dragonfly or neutral, Scorpion or damage, and Beetle or defensive stance. His outgoing damage to the raid will increase over time, and Ravana will enrage once he hits 8 stacks. Depending on what stance he's in, Ravana will cast certain abilities. The first phase begins in Dragonfly or neutral stance with Blinding Blade. This is a frontal cleave that can be mitigated by the number of players sharing it. The two tanks can soak it in front, or the boss can be turned to share the damage with the entire group. Up next, Ravana will cast one of 3 possible Seeing Sides. This creates a shield around 3 of Ravana's 4 sides. Any physical damage done to a shielded side will do damage, knock back, and slow the player. These barriers last for 6 seconds. The cast before each barrier lets you quickly know what side to attack from without having to wait to actually see the barriers themselves. If you see the Seeing left or right, attack from the opposite side. If you see the Seeing wings, attack from the front. Healers will need to look for Atmalinga, a raid-wide stomp that needs to be healed through. Up next, the main tank will deal with Tapasya, a 3-strike frontal cone that also knocks back. The first hit of Tapasya is unavoidable, but the next 2 should be avoided by moving to the side or through the boss. By now, the raid will most likely be pushing into the next phase, where Ravana will be in Scorpion or damage stance. In this stance, Ravana will cast one of 4 liberation attacks, the first being Prelude to Liberation. As he takes increased damage in this stance, this is the perfect time to pop cooldowns and burn him down while he casts. Prelude to Liberation will hit anyone within melee to mid-range once the cast is complete. All players need to ensure to move away from Ravana before this time. Next, Ravana will throw out a number of line AoEs that should be avoided. Fire puddles will also come up that must be avoided. Stepping into these will leave you with an insane fire dot, almost guaranteeing your death. Lastly, 4 to 5 players will be marked with these massive liberation circles. These players need to spread around the room, ensuring no overlap on affected players while everyone else gets out of the way. No player should take more than 1 hit from a liberation circle ever. Up next, Ravana will immediately start casting Liberation. This is another mini burn phase. Liberation will hit any players that aren't directly behind him, so make sure you are on his bum. Remember to use the hitbox indicators if you're unsure what side is his back. Once the cast is complete, Ravana will disappear and 4 clones will reappear somewhere around the edge of the arena. This is identical to Ifrit's rush mechanic. Find where the first clone appears, watch for what side the next one drops down, and move to the opposite end of the room. Wait for the first clone to rush, and start running around the edge of the room to avoid the rest. Next up, Ravana will fall back into Dragonfly or neutral stance. Ravana will first cast Warlord Shell, creating a stone skin that must be destroyed. If not destroyed in time, Ravana will wipe the raid with a massive blast and knockback. A Seeing Side will also be cast during this time, so players need to move appropriately in order to destroy his stone skin in time. When Ravana summons his winged friends, all players need to switch and destroy the spirit and moonganas immediately. Any sword that is allowed to drop will make the end of the fight substantially harder, and you should have no stacks going into the last phase. Tanks and healers are still dealing with cleaves and AoE healing at this time, so be careful not to stand in front when destroying the adds. Ravana will then cast his ultimate Bloody Fuller, heal through the damage, and get ready for the next phase. The first thing to do here is to quickly discern which area of the fence is still a safe zone. In this phase, Ravana will begin by casting Pillars of Heaven, and all players need to ensure they are lined up with a fence to avoid getting punted off. Remember that this does damage based on proximity. Immediately after the knockback, Ravana will mark up a player and cast Laughing Rose. This is a huge hit whose damage will be shared between the entire raid by stacking up. Up next, a random player will be targeted with Prey. Prey needs to be immediately passed to the main tank, who will soak the Sapernica hits it attracts. As soon as the first wave of Sapernicas go off, the remainder of the raid will move to the edge of the arena behind Ravana and wait for the tethered orbs to spawn. Wait for the orbs to start moving towards you before running along the edge and kiting the orbs away. The main tank here will have to dodge Rose of Hate, a long column AoE, and the orbs before turning with the raid and keeping Ravana facing away while still soaking the Sapernica hits. There's a bit of fancy footwork involved here, but as long as everyone is positioned appropriately on the edge, the orbs will spawn in an easy to avoid pattern. Up next, back to damage or Scorpion stance. Ravana will begin by casting Swift Liberation. Again, a mini burn phase. About 3/4 of the way through the cast, 4 players will be marked up, indicating in which order they will be hit by the number of swords on their marks. We have the first player go to waymark A, the second to B, and so on while the rest of the raid hangs out away from the center. When Ravana dives towards A, unaffected players can collapse back into the center. From then on, after each marked player is hit once, they need to loop back into the center to avoid double hits. Each hit of Swift Liberation will debuff the player, and more than one hit is a guaranteed death. Swift Liberation can be pretty tricky to dodge as a marked player, so here are a few tips. If you are marked player number 1, I would recommend standing in line with waymark A, but closer to the center for his first hit. Then, move towards D before looping back into the center. Ravana is deceivingly fat, and the width of his charge attack is far greater than it appears. From A, he will charge in the direction of the second marked player at B. That player should be moving towards the previous marker as they're getting charged, before moving to the center. This should ensure that they won't get clipped by Ravana's fatness. The floor pattern is a set line AoE from each cardinal point, and I would recommend assigning quadrants to every player so as not to overlap liberation circles too much. Each player runs to their assigned sections, spreading out liberation circles as necessary. Next up, Ravana will begin to cast Final Liberation. During this cast, 2 players will be inflicted with prey. There are a few ways to handle this double prey mechanic, so choose what your group is most comfortable with. For our group, we prefer to have the 2 prey targets move to waymarks A and C, while the rest of the group is at waymark B. The 2 tanks will be waiting between B and the respective players to grab prey as soon as Ravana dives to them. As soon as the first dive goes off, each tank will run by their players, picking up prey and continuing on to the other side of the platform. At the same time, the liberation circles will spread out. Anyone unaffected by all of these things can move to the center safely. Immediately after the liberation circle AoEs go off, all players must stack into the center to avoid the fiery dynamo. As soon as that's cast, players must then immediately run to the outer edge. If you get hit by the second AoE, you will be knocked off the platform. Both are very fast casts, so everyone needs to be ready to move in and out as quickly as possible. Once all of that is done, Ravana will go back into Dragonfly stance, and the first phase will repeat with a new Warlord's Shell. Destroy the stone skin, dodge around the seeing whatevers, watch for the AoE stomp, and tanks do your thing. Remember that the damage in this phase is a bit more substantial due to Ravana's stacking buff. Next, he'll go into Beetle stance, and another Pillars of Heaven will be cast. Position appropriately to avoid death, share Laughing Rose, pass the prey, dodge some orbs, and push him into the last Scorpion stance. Here, Ravana will randomly cast one of his liberation attacks, so deal with whatever comes as necessary. Again, as long as people aren't dying to mechanics, DPS should be no problem. If you have any questions or comments, please let me know. Good luck with your weapon drops, and I will see you all in Alexander. As always, thanks for watching. Till next time.